No structural beat is removed. A body dropped into the snow. It hit hard, face first, and didn't move. A dog started howling, a thin, broken sound that carried down the whole mountain. The old woman lay there in the dark, her lips going blue, her fingers stiff and white. Below her, through the pines, torches burned and drums beat. A whole village was celebrating something. Nobody down there could hear the dog. Nobody knew a woman was freezing to death on the ridge road above them. Except one girl. She was supposed to be at that ceremony. Her whole future waited by those torches. Instead, she was running up the wrong way, into the cold, toward the howling. Her name was Rowan Ashcroft, and by dawn her own father would throw her out for what she did next. What could a 17-year-old possibly do to shame her entire bloodline? Stay with me on this one. To understand what Rowan was running toward, you have to understand what she was running from. Down in that valley, the whole Iron Pine pack had gathered, every soul of them. In those mountains, a she-wolf got one Luna ceremony in her life. One. The night she turned 17, on the first full moon after, she stood before the pack and accepted her fated bond. She became somebody. Miss it and there was no second chance, ever. And this was Rowan's night. She was the Alpha's daughter. Cassius Ashcroft ruled the Iron Pine with a hard hand and a harder voice, and for 17 years he'd been waiting to see his only child take her place. There was a fire built as tall as a man. There was a boy named Torin standing by that fire in his father's old coat, sweating in the cold, because Torin was her fated bond and tonight the whole pack would witness it. There was a pendant of moonstone hanging warm against Rowan's chest, the same one her mother had worn, and her dead grandmother before that. Everything an Iron Pine girl could want was down there waiting for her. She'd left the gathering for 1 minute, just to breathe. The lodge was hot and loud and her heart was slamming, and she'd slipped out the back and walked up the ridge road a little way, just to be alone with the moon before she gave her life to the pack. That's when she heard it, the howl. Not a wolf. She knew every wolf voice in these mountains the way you know your own family talking in the next room. This was a dog, an old dog, and a scared one up above her where the road narrowed and iced over. Rowan stopped. She looked back down at the torches. She looked up into the black. Here's the thing about that moment. She could have told herself it was nothing, a trapper's dog, a coyote. She could have walked back into that warm lodge and nobody would ever have known she'd paused. Her whole life was 30 steps behind her downhill, easy. What was up that road was cold and steep and none of her business. She went up the road. She found the hound first, a gray old thing with a white muzzle, arthritic in the hips, dragging itself in circles and crying. Bramble, though she didn't know his name yet. And past the dog, off the edge where the wind had knocked her down, lay a woman so old and so small she looked like a bundle of rags somebody had dropped. Rowan dropped to her knees and turned the woman over. The face was gray. The lips were blue, but there was breath, thin, rattling, barely there, alive, for now. Down in the valley the drums changed rhythm. Rowan knew that rhythm. It was the call for the Luna. It was them calling her name. Right now, at this exact second, the whole pack was turning to look at the door of the lodge, waiting for the Alpha's daughter to walk into the firelight. And the Alpha's daughter was on her knees in the snow with a dying stranger's head in her lap. She looked at the woman. She looked at the torches. She understood completely what she was choosing. If she stayed, she missed the ceremony. If she missed it, it was gone. No bond, no place, no future. Her father would never forgive it. And if she left the woman died. It was that simple and that cruel. Nobody was coming up this road. It was her or it was nobody. Rowan made her choice in about 4 seconds and it cost her everything she had. She pulled off her ceremonial cloak, the fine white one, the one they'd sewn for months, and wrapped it around a freezing stranger. Then she got her arms under the old woman's knees and shoulders, and she stood up. You want to know what she was carrying up that mountain in the dark? A woman she'd never met. No name she knew, no face she recognized, no claim on her at all. That's the whole point. Rowan didn't stop to ask who she was saving, she just saved her. There was an old line shack up off the road, a half-collapsed thing trappers used. Rowan carried the woman there through snow up to her shins, Bramble limping behind, whining the whole way. She kicked the door open. She laid the woman down, and then she went to work. She built a fire with hands shaking from cold and from fear. She stripped off the woman's frozen clothes and wrapped her in every dry thing she could find. She lay down beside her, body to body, and gave the stranger her own warmth because that was the only warmth left in that shack. All night. The woman shook and moaned and stopped breathing twice, and both times Rowan breathed for her, pressed on her chest, called her back. "Stay," Rowan kept whispering. "Stay with me, come on, stay." And down in the valley, the fire burned low, the pack drank and danced, and Cassius Ashcroft stood at the door of his lodge with his jaw set like stone, staring up at a ridge road he could not see, waiting for a daughter who was not coming. The boy Torin waited by the fire until his knees ached. Then past that. The bond ceremony has to happen at the height of the moon or it doesn't count. And the moon climbed and it peaked and it started down again, and the luna's place by the fire stayed empty. You have to understand what that looked like to the pack. It wasn't a mystery. It was an insult. The Alpha's own blood, too proud or too flighty to show up for the most sacred night of her life. Whispers started, then louder than whispers. Cassius heard everyone, and each word was a coal on his neck. Up in the shack, none of that reached Rowan. She had a small, quiet war against the cold, and she was winning it one breath at a time. Around 3 in the morning, the old woman's shaking eased. Her skin went from gray to something with a little life in it. And once, just once, her eyes cracked open and found Rowan's face in the firelight. "You should be somewhere," the old woman rasped. "There's fire down the mountain, I saw it, music." "I'm where I need to be," Rowan said and put another log on. The woman looked at her a long moment. Something moved behind those old eyes. "What's your name, girl?" "Rowan." "Rowan." The old woman closed her eyes. Her cracked lips moved. "Meg," she managed. "I'm Meg, that fool dog is Bramble." And then she slept real sleep, warm sleep, not the sleep of the dying. Rowan sat up the rest of the night feeding the fire, the hound's head heavy on her knee. She didn't cry. I want you to know that. She had just given away her whole life and she did not cry. She just sat there in the light of a stranger's fire and kept it burning. At dawn, the storm had passed. Meg was breathing steady, color in her face, deep asleep. She would live. Rowan had done what she came up that road to do. So she stood, stiff and hollow, and walked back down the mountain to face what she'd chosen. She wasn't running from it. Understand that too. She walked down that road with her chin up to take whatever came. What came was worse than she'd let herself imagine. The whole pack was still gathered in the gray morning light, red-eyed and cold and angry, and when Rowan stepped into the clearing, they went dead silent. Every face turned to her. She was covered in another woman's filth and blood, her fine dress torn, no cloak, and her father stood in the center of them all like a mountain that had decided to fall. Cassius Ashcroft did not ask her where she'd been. That was the thing that told her everything. He didn't ask. A father who wanted to understand would have asked. He'd already decided. "You shamed us," he said. His voice was very quiet, which was how you knew it was bad. "You shamed your mother's memory. You shamed my name. You let this whole pack stand in the cold all night waiting on you." "Father, there was a woman." "I don't care," he said it flat. "I don't care what you found more important than your own blood. You had one duty, one night, and you spat on it." There was nothing soft left in his face at all. "You're no Luna, you're no daughter of mine. Ironpine casts you out, go." The pack made a sound then, a low, ugly sound. Torin, the boy who was to be her mate, wouldn't even look at her. And Rowan felt the whole world she'd been born into close its door in her face. She didn't beg. She looked at her father one more time, then lifted the moonstone pendant over her head, her mother's, her grandmother's, and held it out to him. He didn't take it, so she set it down in the snow at his feet, turned, and walked out of the only home she had ever known. Now here's where you'd think the story breaks her. A 17-year-old girl, cast out, no pack, no name, walking into the wilderness in the dead of a Montana winter. That's a death sentence up there, and everybody watching her go knew it. But listen, she didn't have far to walk, because halfway up the ridge road, coming down toward her slow and steady, was old Meg Colvin, alive. On her feet, leaning on a bent stick, Bramble at her heel. Meg had woken in the shack, found herself alone, and set out to find the girl who saved her. And she found her, a banished, frozen child, stumbling up the same road she'd stumbled up the night before. Meg took one look at Rowan's face and knew. "They threw you out," she said, not a question. Rowan couldn't answer, she just nodded. "For me." Another nod. Meg was quiet a moment. Then she reached up with a cold old hand and took Rowan by the arm. "Come on, girl," she said gently. "I've got a place. It's not much. It's warm. You'll come with me and sleep, and we'll worry about the rest when there's some food in you." And she did. Meg had a small cabin 2 ridges over, a snug place with a stone hearth and dried apples hanging from the rafters. She sat Rowan down by the fire, wrapped her in a real quilt, fed her hot broth with her own hands. Bramble curled up across Rowan's feet like she'd always belonged there. The fire crackled. The wind died down outside. And for the first time in a long, terrible night, Rowan felt her shoulders come down from around her ears. It was over, that's what it felt like. She'd lost her pack, yes, but she was alive and warm, and this strange, kind old woman had taken her in, and maybe she could build some small life out here at the edge of the world. Maybe the worst had already happened. She fell asleep by that fire thinking the storm had passed. It hadn't even started. She woke to a horn, not a howl. A horn, the long, brass-carrying blast of the ironpine hunting horn, close, echoing off the ridges. Bramble was on his feet, growling. Rowan sat up, heart hammering, that old cold fear flooding right back in. Meg was standing at the window, very still, looking out at the snow. "Riders," Meg said, "6 of them, ironpine colors." Rowan's stomach dropped. "They've come for me. My father sent them to finish it." "No." Meg turned from the window, and there was something in her face now that hadn't been there before. Something older and harder than a frail old woman had any right to wear. "They're not hunting you, child. They're hunting me." And that's the moment the whole story turned. Because I need you to understand, this was never really about a girl who missed a ceremony. "What do you mean, hunting you?" Rowan whispered. Meg crossed the room. She knelt by the hearth, pried up a loose flat stone Rowan hadn't noticed, and lifted out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped it slow. Inside was a staff, short, black wood worn smooth by 100 years of hands, and set into its head was a full moon carved from pale white stone, ringed in old silver. Rowan knew that shape. Every wolf in these mountains knew that shape. It was on the door of every lodge. It was carved above the fire at every ceremony. It was the sign of the one soul that stood above all the packs, the one whose blessing made a Luna and an Alpha. "You're the Moon Warden," Rowan breathed. It came out of her like the air going out of a room. The old woman, old Meg Colvin, the beggar in the snow, the dying stranger, held the staff in 2 steady hands and looked at the girl who had given up everything to save her without ever knowing who she was. 61 years, Meg said quietly. "I have blessed every Luna and confirmed every Alpha in these mountains. I was on my way to bless yours, Rowan. That's why I was on that road. I go on foot in rags without a name. Do you know why?" Her eyes glittered. "Because the moon doesn't care how a heart treats the powerful. Anybody's kind to a warden. The moon cares how a heart treats a freezing old nobody on a dark road when there's nothing to be gained. That's the only test that has ever mattered. And last night, child, your whole pack failed it. Every soul of them walked past that road. Every soul but one. Now stop right there, because that's the payoff you came for. And if you're feeling it land the way I hope it's landing, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because the reckoning coming down that mountain is the reason I'm telling you this story at all. The horn blew again, closer. Rowan's mind was reeling. But the ceremony, if you never came to bless it. Then it never happened, Meg said grimly. No warden, no blessing. No blessing, no Luna. And no confirmed Luna in the bloodline means Cassius Ashcroft's line has no standing among the mountain packs at all. She was pulling on a heavier cloak now, moving faster than a woman her age should. That's why the riders are out. Your father woke this morning to find his ceremony void, and his warden vanished on his own mountain. Every pack in these hills will hear that the Ironpine lost the Moon Warden to the cold on the very night they were supposed to honor her. He's not hunting a runaway daughter anymore. He's hunting the only thing that can save his name, and he doesn't know he threw the rest of his name out into the snow last night. It hit Rowan all at once, the whole terrible shape of it. Her father had banished her for missing a ceremony that only existed because of the woman she'd left to save it. He had cast out his daughter for saving the one person who could restore everything he'd lost. Then we tell them, Rowan said. We go down and you show them who you are, and this all ends. Oh, it ends, Meg said. And for the first time, the frail old woman smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of something that had watched packs rise and fall for 61 winters and was about to remind one of them exactly how small it was. But not the way your father wants it to. He is going to answer for last night, Rowan, in front of everyone. That's a promise. The door shook under a heavy fist, open in the name of the Ironpine. Meg looked at Rowan. You don't have to come, she said. This is my reckoning, not yours. You could stay here where it's warm and let me settle it. Rowan stood up. She was still just a 17-year-old girl in a torn dress, cold to the bone, thrown away by her own blood not 6 hours ago. But she thought about her father's flat, closed, decided face, and all the years she'd spent trying to be enough for it. He's my father, she said. I'll look him in the eye. Meg's hard smile softened just a little. I thought you might say that. She opened the door. The lead rider was Garrick, her father's oldest hunter, a big scarred man Rowan had known her whole life. He filled the doorway, cold and impatient, and barely glanced at the old woman. We're searching every shelter on the mountain, he said. An old woman, a stranger, lost in the storm last night. The Alpha wants her found. Have you seen? And then his eyes fell to Meg's hands, to the black staff and the white moon and the ring of old silver, and every drop of blood ran out of his face. He knew that shape too. Garrick, the big scarred hunter who had never in his life knelt to anyone but Cassius Ashcroft, dropped straight down into the snow onto both knees. Warden, he choked out. Forgive me. We didn't know. We didn't. Get up, Meg said, not unkindly, and take me down the mountain to your Alpha, all of you. There's a debt on the Ironpine that has to be paid in daylight in front of the whole pack, and you'll take this girl with us, and not a hand will touch her. She fixed the big man with those old glittering eyes. This girl is under the protection of the Moon Warden. Do you understand me, Garrick? She walks in front of you like a queen, or you answer to the moon herself. Yes, Warden, Garrick whispered. He couldn't look at Rowan. None of them could, because they were starting to do the math, all 6 of those hardened hunters, on exactly what it meant that the Warden had been found warm and alive in a cabin, and who they'd all watched get cast out at dawn. They came down the mountain in a strange procession. 6 of the Iron Pine's fiercest riders, and at the front a bent old woman with a staff, and beside her a banished girl in a torn white dress, and an arthritic hound limping proud as a wolf at her heel. The whole pack was still in the clearing when they came out of the trees. Word had spread that riders were bringing down the lost stranger, and they'd gathered to see it, hundreds of them, and at the center stood Cassius Ashcroft with the void ceremony hanging over him like an axe. He saw the riders first. Relief broke across his hard face. Then he saw the old woman with them and the staff in her hands, and the color went out of him the same way it had gone out of Garrick. And then he saw Rowan, walking free at the warden's side, and he did not understand anything at all. "On your knees," Garrick called out to the whole clearing, his voice cracking. "The Moon Warden walks among us. On your knees, all of you." The Iron Pine pack went down like wheat in a wind, hundreds of them folding to the snow. Cassius Ashcroft was the last man standing, and he stood a beat too long and everyone saw it, and then his knees hit the ground too. Meg walked to the center of the clearing, to the cold, dead fire where a Luna should have stood the night before. She planted her staff in the snow, and the little moonstone pendant, Rowan's pendant, still lying where she dropped it at her father's feet, caught the light beside it. "Cassius Ashcroft," Meg said, and though her voice was old and cracked, it carried to the last soul in that clearing. "Alpha of the Iron Pine, I came to your mountain last night to bless your daughter. I came the way I always come, as a beggar, as a nobody, as a freezing old woman on a dark road. And I fell on that road. And I lay dying in the snow within earshot of your fire, your drums, your feast." She swept the staff slowly across the whole kneeling pack. "How many of you came up that road? How many heard an old dog crying in the dark and went to see why?" Silent, terrible silence. "Not one of you," Meg said. "Your whole great pack, and not one of you left the warmth to see who was dying above you." Her eyes came to rest on Cassius. "Except one. One girl left her own ceremony, gave up her cloak, her bond, her name, and carried a worthless old stranger to shelter and breathed her own life into her all night long. She didn't know who I was. That's what makes it count. She thought she was saving a nobody, and she gave up everything to do it anyway." Meg turned and looked at Rowan, standing there in her torn dress with her chin up. "And you," she said, turning back to Cassius, and now her voice went cold as the mountain. "You cast her out for it, your own blood. You threw the truest heart in these mountains into the snow to die, and you did it without asking her a single question. You had one duty last night too, Alpha, not to keep a schedule, to know your own daughter's heart, and you failed it worse than any of them." Cassius Ashcroft knelt in the snow with his head bowed, and could not say one word. "Here is the debt," Meg went on, and the whole pack held its breath. "By the law of the mountain, I can strip your line. One word from me and the Iron Pine has no Alpha and no standing, and the packs will carve you up before the snow melts. You know this is true." A sound went through the crowd. Cassius's jaw worked. "Then do it," he said hoarsely. "I earned it." "You did," Meg agreed, "but it wouldn't be justice. It would just be more cold, and I've had enough of the cold." She lifted her staff and pointed it not at Cassius but at Rowan. "The debt is hers. She's the one who was wronged. She's the one who paid, so she's the one who decides." Meg looked at the girl. "Rowan Ashcroft, your father threw you into the snow. I can take everything from him and give it to you right now in front of them all. Say the word and you're Luna of the Iron Pine and he's nothing. It's yours," her eyes were steady, "or you can choose something else. It's your debt, child, spend it how you want." And the whole pack, hundreds of them on their knees in the snow, turned to look at the banished girl who now held the whole future of the Iron Pine in her two cold hands. Rowan stood there a long moment. She looked at her father kneeling. She'd spent 17 years wanting that man to see her, to be proud of her, to say she was enough. And here he was on his knees, and she could take his whole world away with one word, and part of her, I won't lie to you, part of her wanted to. She walked across the snow, past Meg, straight to her father. And she stopped in front of him and looked down at the top of his bowed head. "Look at me," she said. Cassius Ashcroft raised his eyes to his daughter's face, and whatever was in her expression broke something in him that his pride had been holding up all morning, and this hard mountain of a man's eyes filled with tears in front of his entire pack. "I went up that road," Rowan said quietly, "because somebody was dying and nobody else would go. That's all. That's the whole thing you banished me for. And I would do it again tonight. I'd do it every night." She drew a slow breath. "I don't want your title. I never wanted it. I wanted a father who'd ask me why before he threw me away." "Rowan," his voice was wrecked, "I was wrong. Before the moon and the whole pack I was wrong and you were right, and I am ashamed to my bones. I don't ask you to forgive it. I only ask you to come home." Rowan bent down. She picked the moonstone pendant up out of the snow where it had lain all morning. Her mother's, her grandmother's. She turned it over in her cold fingers. Then she reached out and put it, not around her own neck but back into her father's hands, and she closed his fingers over it. "Keep it warm for me," she said. "I'll take it when I'm ready, on my own night, blessed proper this time." She glanced back over her shoulder. "If the warden's willing." Meg Colvin let out a slow breath, and the hard old face finally, fully softened, and she smiled a real smile. "The warden's willing," she said. They held a second ceremony that night. A real one. Not the cold, proud spectacle it would have been, but something quieter and truer. Meg blessed it herself, with the staff and the white stone moon, and she named Rowan Ashcroft the Luna of the Ironpine before the whole kneeling pack, not because of her bloodline, and not because her father willed it, but because on one dark night she'd proven the only thing the moon has ever cared about. Torin, the fated bond, came to her before the fire and he couldn't meet her eyes. "I didn't come up the road either," he said, ashamed. "I didn't even wonder where you were. I just felt insulted." He shook his head. "You're too good for me, Rowan. If you'll still have me, I'll spend my whole life trying to be worth the road you walked." And Rowan, who had learned a great deal in one night about what people are and are not, looked at him and decided that a boy honest enough to say that out loud was a boy worth teaching. "Then start walking," she said, and took his hand. Cassius Ashcroft was still alpha. Meg let him keep it on one condition, spoken in front of everyone so he could never forget it. Once a year, on the anniversary of that night, the alpha of the Ironpine would walk the ridge road himself, alone in the cold, and stop at every shelter, and see who might be dying in the dark. Forever. So that no soul was ever again left crying on that mountain while the Ironpine feasted below. He agreed with tears still on his face, and he kept it, too, every year, until he was too old to climb, and then Rowan walked it for him. Old Meg didn't leave right away. She stayed the rest of the winter in a warm room in the Alpha's own lodge, with Bramble asleep by the fire and Rowan at her side most evenings, and the two of them talked long into the nights about all the things a girl who's going to lead a pack ought to know. When spring came and the passes opened, Meg took up her staff and her old ragged cloak again, ready to walk on to the next mountain, the next pack, the next quiet test. Rowan walked her up to the top of the ridge road, to the exact spot. They stood there in the thin spring sun, right where a body had dropped into the snow one winter night. "Why'd you really tell me the truth up in that cabin?" Rowan asked. "You could have just vanished. Nobody would have known what you were." Meg looked out over the mountains a long while. 61 years, she said. "I've been looking for one, just one. Somebody who'd give up everything for a nobody in the snow and want nothing back." She patted the girl's cheek with a papery old hand. "I found her, An old woman likes to see who she's leaving the world to before she goes. She smiled. Bramble stays with you. He's earned a warm floor and I'm too old to keep him fed. Mind him for me. And then Meg Colvin, the Moon Warden, walked on down the far side of the mountain and out of the story, and Rowan never saw her again. But every year after, on the anniversary night, there'd be a single moon flower left frozen on the doorstep of the Ironpin Lodge, come from nobody, and Rowan always knew. She stood there on the ridge road that spring morning, Luna of the Ironpine, the pendant warm around her neck at last, the old hound leaning against her leg. And she thought about how close she'd come to walking back into that warm lodge and never going up the road at all. How her whole life had turned on 4 seconds and one choice to be kind when there was nothing in it for her. That's the thing nobody tells you. The big moments don't announce themselves. They come dressed as an old woman in the snow, and a dog crying in the dark, and a road you're not supposed to walk up. And who you are is just whatever you do about it when nobody's watching and there's nothing to gain. Rowan turned and walked back down the mountain toward the smoke of home, and the dog limped along beside her, and behind them the ridge road lay empty and quiet in the sun. This version runs 4,974 words, inside your 4,805,200 window. The hook is exactly 150 words and untouched. The closing paragraphs are preserved verbatim, and the CTA still sits right after the Moon Warden reveal. Cuts came only from redundant connective phrasing and a few doubled descriptions. No beat was removed.